Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Bryan. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
If you feel like you're one of the good guys, you might be feeling frustrated, exasperated, and perhaps even skeptical about the current national conversation surrounding Me Too. You've likely found yourself in countless experiences or conversations lately where the situation feels gray at best. You have a lot to say, but you're afraid to say it and worried that one wrong move will land you in the hot seat. This is a passage taken directly from the back cover of the brand new and important book entitled Modern Manhood, Conversations about the Complicated World of Being a Good Man Today. Modern Manhood was written by Emmy and Peabody Nominated reporter Cleo Stiller. Yes, Cleo is a woman writing a book for men, and you'll hear why during our interview. Bryan and I had the honor of being interviewed by Cleo in her research for this book, and I've got to tell you guys, you need to pick up a copy now. She hits all of the categories where the rules now seem to be blurry and are sending men into a tizzy, frustrated, exasperated, and skeptical around the conversations of dating, money, gender behavior protocols in the workplace, parenting, and the topic of our conversation today, a fearless exploration of sexual gray areas. We tackle a few of the toughest questions of our time during this interview, like, how do I as a man participate in the current narrative without being called out for saying the wrong thing or being exposed for something that I did years ago? Is everything I was taught about courtship and sexual pursuit now considered creepy? And how come women are telling me contradictory things about what they expect when it comes to chivalry and securing sexual consent? This is a special podcast because it was filmed in front of a live audience of about 70 people at our event called The Discerning Sexual Wisdom for the Modern Man, which is a live event series that we host in New York City for men to explore the forces that shape their sexuality. This was our 11th such event, and I've got to say that it ranks right up there for both me and Bryan as an all-time favorite because the audience was just lit up to discuss and debate these issues. This is the first episode of a two-part series, and the second will be released this Thursday. Enjoy. All right. Good evening, everybody. Are you all here for the Dick event? Because if you're not, it's about to get weird here in a second. So like Michael said, my name is Dominic. This handsome young man over here is Bryan, and the star of our show this evening is the brilliant, lovely Cleo Stiller. Can we please have a round of applause for her? She wrote the extraordinary book, Modern Manhood, and I believe this is a very important piece of work, especially during our period of time today. And we're going to go deep into one small section of the book around sexual gray areas. So for those of you who have never been to it, actually, can I just see a show of hands? How many of you have been to a Discerning Dick event before? You, Bryan's been to one. Okay, thanks. And then first timers? Awesome. Welcome. Okay, we even got people up in the cheap seats up here. We see you. We love you. All right. All right. I can't hear a word you're saying. So for those of you who have never been to one of these events before, the Discerning Dick is about sexual wisdom for the modern man. It was a forum that Bryan and I wanted to start for men to explore the forces that shape their sexuality because most guys that we talk to just never really understand the forces early on in their lives that shaped our desires, our insecurities, our fears, our expectations when it comes to sex. And so this is a forum specifically engineered for men, but as you can see, we welcome everyone, and oftentimes we end up having 60 to 70% women at our events, and we love that as well. For those of you who have never met Bryan and I before, we run a website called doinnerwork.com. Our work with men is really around the areas of how to raise your performance in life, how to live a purpose-driven life, and how to ignite your sex life as well. We have a podcast that we launched earlier this year called The Great Man Within, and it's become really successful.
We do talk about those different areas of performance and passion and purpose-driven life. But for this audience, if you came to talk about sex, some of our most popular podcasts to date, we just dropped a couple with Lisa Ann this week. If you don't know her, she's one of the top 10 most downloaded porn stars in the world. We did an episode on how to last longer in bed, and I don't put this picture of Bryan and I up there as us being the examples for that. No. But I didn't really know what kind of other picture to put up there.
I'm creeped out by that.
So that's a placeholder. And one of our top 10 most popular episodes is one called Inside Secrets from a Women's Sex Coach. And that is Blair Lindsay, who's a friend of ours and introduced by Lauren, who's filming over here in the background. One of the things that we love to do here at the Discerning Dick and also on our podcast is we love to speak with women who run communities of other women, particularly sex coaches and embodiment coaches, because like we need to learn as guys from women who are working deeply with other women.
Dominic and I are not experts in any of the topics that we talk about, including how to stay longer in bed, right? But we're just looking for experiences. We're not looking for advice. And so you will hear us up here talk about some of the best practices, some of the stories that Cleo has pulled through her book, but we're not going to be giving advice even up here. So we ask the same of this crowd. Also, we have a singular perspective. Dominic and I are both white, straight, cisgender. Did I get that right? Perfect. Got it. I've been working on that. That's our perspective that we're coming from. And all perspectives are welcome here. And part of this experience is bringing those out. And so we're learning up here with you as we're doing this. What else we got?
I think you nailed it.
That's it. That's the container. Okay. Here we go.
Here we go. Ready to rock and roll? So some of the big questions that men have been asking us that are addressed in Cleo's book are, what does it mean to be a good guy today? And when does no mean no? And when, if ever, does it mean not yet? And then what do I do if I have gray areas in my past? I feel like I'm a good guy. I feel like I want to be an advocate. I want to speak up about these things, but I'm afraid if I raise my hand and I bring any visibility to me, that someone's going to come from my past and blow me up. And I'm too afraid, so I'm just going to sit on the sidelines. These are the big questions that a lot of men are asking us. And this is why we are so grateful to you, Cleo, who decided to fearlessly jump into the arena to answer these questions with what I believe to be a really brilliant book that is wonderfully written, wonderfully researched. And Bryan and I both had the honor of being interviewed in the book. So for those of you who don't know Cleo, and we're going to get into that in a second here, she is an Emmy nominated and Peabody nominated reporter. I mean, obviously the accolades, run deep and wide. And so I suppose what we would love to know from you, Cleo, is who were you before writing this book? How were you nominated for those awards? And why did you choose to write Modern Manhood?
Great. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I am very excited for this conversation. Modern Manhood did just launch on Tuesday, so this is my first time talking about it in front of a live audience.
How lucky are we? Give her a round of applause.
So thank you very much. I am a reporter and a journalist by trade. I've been reporting for 8 years now, and I got my start at Bloomberg as a financial news reporter. So I got very good at talking to people about money, which is a topic we are traditionally very uncomfortable talking about. And eventually, when I got a little tired of always having to follow the money trail, a mentor of mine said, well, I'm launching a new show. I know you love women's health and you're a great talker. Like, why don't you come over and report for us? So I went over to a network called Fusion that was launched by Univision and Disney and created a show for them called Sex Right Now with Cleo Stiller. The show title is obviously very provocative, but we hit topics ranging from gender identity to body positivity to the way that technology and shifting cultural attitudes were making the way folks mostly our age, the way that we were meeting, hooking up, staying together, kind of unprecedented compared to other generations. So we had this show, and inevitably they would ask me a question. And these questions started kind of falling into the same camps, right? One, I'm a single guy and I'm terrified to approach women now. I don't want to wind up the next disease. I'm sorry. Or I'm a new parent. I'm watching these Kavanaugh hearings and I'm thinking like, God, how do I even raise a good man right now? Or I'm a manager. I have a lot of hiring power and I wouldn't cop to this in real life, but I'm kind of afraid to work with my female employees. So these things are piling in my inbox, right? And I'm like, shit, hell if I know, right? And so eventually enough came in that I said, this is a critical junction that we are at right now. We have men who previously thought they were good guys, were kind of walking through their life a little unaware of how their behavior might have been affecting other folks. And now they want to know what went wrong. Like, am I a good guy? I'm a good guy. I actually wanted to call the book, but I'm one of the good guys. And so that's how this book was born. And so this book is a compilation of interviews I did with nearly 75 men, women, and non-binary folks all across the country. We have 200 sources total in this. And so it's really not my opinion. This book is a crowdsourced document. This is what men are saying and feeling all over the country about these really tough gray areas. You're like, shit, I don't know. So that's what we're going to dive into tonight. But that's this project.
Yeah, hell yeah. I love how fearlessly, all of the tough questions you confront in the book. And what I love about it is you don't provide prescriptive solutions because there are no black and white answers. And they're like, you help people to dive through the murky waters. And we're going to do that tonight as well, because we're going to be asking some of those difficult questions. And guess what? All of you, you're not just here to listen. Like, you're going to actually have some opportunities to speak with each other. We're going to pose some of these questions with one another. Now that the book has been launched this week, what's one of the most surprising questions that you've been getting? And you mentioned that there's one question that keeps bubbling to the top.
Yeah, it's not a surprise, right? Everyone is asking me, you're a woman. Why are you writing a book called Modern Manhood? And I think that that is a very, very fair question. And I'm happy to answer it. The answer is that there are a lot of women who are speaking to women about where we're going to go from here. There are a lot of men who are speaking to their friends on group text. They're kind of fumbling through it with their partners, in the afternoon, right? I know that men care about this. I know women care about this. And it's very important that we kind of come together at a certain point, right? And all talk about, okay, this is how it feels for me. How does it feel for you? And it's our decision then, right? Like, what do we want to keep from the past? And what do we want to let go?
If you haven't seen the cover of it yet, here, this is the cover. And as I was walking through, either I was reading it or I had it on my lap or on my bag, and I started noticing people looking at it. And my defensive nature immediately came up, especially when guys looked at the book and they looked at me and they looked at the book and they looked at me. And they could have just said, like, you need a book? Like, you need a manual to be a guy? Like, what is wrong with you? Like, yeah, a man manual. It's ridiculous. And then I noticed women. And they looked at the book. And they looked at me. And they looked at the book. And they looked at me. Yeah. And they're like, and so this is such an interesting topic. It's so polarizing. Like, men repel from this. Like, I am a man. Like, I don't need a man card given to me. I don't need to learn how to do this. And I find it so interesting that other topics in our lives are on finances or on physicality. We got magazines, we have books, we have podcasts. But when it comes to relationship, when it comes to this inner work around masculinity, we're expected to have it all figured out. And the reality is that we just don't. And one of the reasons that I love what Cleo's put together here is that guys, they think these things. They can be in a car and listen to a podcast, that's okay. But discussing the real vulnerabilities with our friends, or God forbid, someone outside that group, is almost impossible. And so what this book showed me was something that I learned about 10 years ago. I was diagnosed with both testicular cancer and chlamydia on the same day about 10 years ago. And when I started talking about my experience around sexual health, guys started coming to me and talking to me about their sexual health experiences. And these aren't the braggadocious locker room talk sort of things. These were I went flaccid when I didn't want to, and some of these other topics that guys just don't typically talk about. And so what I learned is that A, I wasn't the only one that had some insecurities around this, and two, that there's other guys doing this, and this book does the same thing. It goes through and talks through those subjects that we kind of think about, maybe in the back of our head, maybe even our unconscious, but we don't really bring to the surface. And this book really does a great job of bringing all that to the surface. So to those guys that are looking at me and looking at me like I need a manual, it's like, yeah, I do need a fucking manual.
So Cleo, what do you hope to accomplish by writing this book and sharing it with the world?
Okay. So as I was saying, right, we are sort of at a critical juncture where we have people who were previously unconscious being more conscious. And we have the younger generation coming up and saying, like, maybe gender and this binary doesn't work for me at all. We have a lot of clashing tides, right? What I don't want to happen is that elections come and the country changes and we don't take a step back and think about where have we come from, what's working, what's not, and where do we want to go. I think that this book, the interviews I had with people who they came to me, right? So I put the call out that I was writing this book, and then men came to me. They were like, thank you. I have a story for you. I wait till you hear this one. They're indignant. They're mad. They're fearful, and they fucking think they're good guys and they want to do well. So what I'm really hoping with this book is that it empowers everyone who reads it to feel more secure in the motivations behind their behavior and more hopeful about where we're all going in general. Because I know there's a lot of fear out there, right? So that's my small goal. Small goal.
We love you for it. All right. Question number 1. What's a bad guy in today's era, right? So we're talking about examples of bad guys, maybe in the media that you've heard about, some names that have already been mentioned. And what is bad guy behavior? So you're going to take a minute. You're going to turn to the partner, someone next to you or the group that you came with. And if you didn't come with anybody, introduce yourself to someone next to you. If you see that someone's sitting by themselves, like turn to them, bring them into your group. We're going to give you a couple of minutes to describe bad guy behavior and even like maybe some names of prominent people who have been outed as bad guys. So what are some examples of bad guy behavior and bad men in general? If you have just a name or a behavior, you want to shout it out. You're in New York City. People shout shit at us all the time. We feel comfortable with it. Go ahead.
Lack of respect.
Lack of respect. What else?
Rape.
Bill Cosby.
Rape. Bill Cosby. Cool. What else?
Any form of manipulation.
Any form of manipulation.
Selfishness.
Selfishness. Cool. What about people? Like we had Bill Cosby. What are the other names?
Matt Lauer.
Matt Lauer.
Trump.
Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey. Yeah, that name gets forgotten sometimes. I don't know why. Any other men? Any other examples of men like that? Epstein. Yep. Louis C.K. Great. Thank you for this. The reason why we wanted to bring this up is because we hear a lot of conversations around good guy, bad guy, and it becomes this binary. And if you want to just take a look at this little slide, it tends to be this, the spectrum of, am I a good guy? Am I a bad guy? It's this binary thing, right? Yes or no, black or white. And usually when we start to ask for examples of bad guys, we end up getting kind of like the Epsteins, the Weinsteins, the Donald Trumps, the Bill Cosbys, right? The Louis C.K.s. Those are the names that pop up. And if you think about where they are on that spectrum, you're talking about like bottom 10% behavior. That's typically when we have these conversations, we typically pigeonhole bad guys into the extreme versions of bad guy behavior. And one of the things that Cleo's book like really helped me to kind of illuminate was this question about are we a bad guy or a good guy is almost irrelevant because it boxes us into this category of something that's far more nuanced, far more complex. And Cleo, like here are the 3 things that like helped me from your book around why this binary is BS. The 3 reasons why the good guy, bad guy binary don't work is we tend to pigeonhole everything into the bottom 10% behavior. That causes us to not have to look very closely at our own nuanced behavior. And it marginalizes, it oversimplifies a highly complex and nuanced conversation. And so, Cleo, tell us some of the things that you found in your book about why we need to be navigating some of these gray areas and some of the conversations that were brought up around Roger Goodell or manipulative behavior, like why we need to be going to those places versus pigeonholing in Trumps and Weinsteins.
Okay. So a lot of people that I interviewed, right, I would ask them, what do you think of the Me Too movement? And their responses would kind of run the gamut. Some, I'm very in favor of it. Some, it's bullshit. Most of them were kind of the opinion, though, that when it first started with Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, etc., obviously I was in favor. Those men should not be in power. They should be in jail. But now it's gone too far. And I heard that a lot. And, you know, one of the linchpin conversations and a name that came up over and over again in questions was Aziz Ansari. And for those of you who don't know, Aziz Ansari is a comedian and had a incident several years ago that was written about on the internet by the woman he went on a date with, where the long and short of it is essentially they went on a date. She went back to his place. He made a move. She said no. He listened for a second, started watching TV again, went back at it. She said no. He went again. She gave him oral sex and then went home. And he texted her, had a nice time, and she told him, "You made me really, really unhappy." And she cried on the way home. Then it got published on the internet and it became a whole nother beast, right? But the Aziz Ansari story is kind of a Rorschach test for how people seem to feel about the Me Too movement in general and its more insidious implications. Because what I heard from a lot of people was, everyone has had a date like that. Like, that's a bad date. That's not a Me Too thing. That's not like a bad guy thing. And that came up over and over again to the point where I wondered, okay, no one's saying it's not common, but does that mean it shouldn't change? Like, can we not do better? Can't we have better hookups? Can't we have better sex where someone's not going home crying in an Uber? So that is why these nuances, right, these gray areas are really important, because the topics that we touch in the book, none of them are going to get you sent to jail or locked up. They're not illegal. But as humans, right, can we do better? Can we not hurt people? So that's kind of where we're operating here tonight, right? And that's why kind of setting aside like rape, murder, we're not touching that stuff right now. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the much more gentle, subtle, intricate, confusing boundaries that need to be explored and fleshed out.
One of the things that we've learned with working with guys and also being guys for most of our lives, I mean, all of mine, most of yours, yeah, okay, is that like we as guys often want like the rule book. We want a prescription, like tell us what to do, very black and white. And for a long enough period of time, like things were pretty clear. And now that there's all this, like, now that the change is taking place, guys are like up in arms, right?
Yes. So, okay. I heard from a guy, and this is the story that leads the sex chapter. This guy reached out to me and was like, "Thank you for writing this book. I have a story for you. This has been on my mind." And he proceeds to tell me a story from 2011. This is like sitting on his brain for 8 years, right? But ever since the Aziz Ansari came out, he was like, shit. So this guy's story, he's a self-described late bloomer, and it was New Year's Eve, and he had a crush on one of his friends, a female friend in his clique. They're all out celebrating for New Year's Eve, and then the ball drops, and he invites a couple of the friends back to his place. So one other guy comes, and the girl comes. And they're back at his apartment and they continue partying a little bit. And then it's very late and the other guy is like, "I'm out of here." The girl kind of like calculates it's like too late. She lives across town. This is 2011, pre-Uber, no public transit. Okay. And he's like, "Well, you could spend the night." And she's like, "Oh, really? You don't mind?" And he's like, "No." So she does. And in his head, he's like, "I'm in." And
how's he like?
I'm in. Well, he did.
like a fist pump.
Yes. You know that feeling when you're like, "I'm in." And this is how he told me the story, right? So I didn't hear it from her. It's from his perspective. But so then she goes and puts on her pajamas. She's borrowing pajamas from him in the bathroom, and he gets into bed. And then she comes out and she gets into bed with him. And he immediately makes a move. And she's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, that's like not what's happening here. I thought you were just offering to let me spend the night." And he stops and he says, he's recounting this to me. He's like, "Partly I'm not totally sure because I was pretty inebriated, but I know what came across my mind was like, girls always say no the first time." And so then he pauses for a beat and then goes back and very aggressively tries to pull her underwear down. And she understandably gets really upset and jumps out of bed and goes and sleeps on the couch and like shuts the door. And he tells me that he spends the night thinking like, how did I read that so wrong? Like, what the hell just happened? And he feels really badly about it. So from his story, then he goes out the next morning and he's very grateful that she received his apology. You know, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel that way. And according to him, now they're actually quite good platonic friends. And I actually had a little tear when I heard this story because I could tell that it had really stuck with him and scared him, that he had really come close to, I mean, like, let's say, like, he crossed the line. Like, that's not how we want our intimate encounters to be. But his story was so common. And so just thinking through, right, like, what I would love to do tonight maybe is like role play a little bit and figure out how that could have gone differently.
Okay. Do you want to do that right now?
No, I'm just saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Well,
yeah.
Because that one came up over and over and over again. How do I approach women now? I was taught to pursue. I was taught men make the first move, or in the second and the third and the fourth. And now you're telling me, oh, don't do that. But then someone will say, why isn't he making a move?
This is such a pervasive topic, and I'm curious for everybody out there. Yeah, who's got some perspectives or reaction, I think, to this type of story? Anybody want to share?
I was going to firstly say with Cleo, like, I feel like it so depends on the woman. Like, even the whole thing of, like, do I go up and talk to her or do I not make a move? It's like, well, like, I know from just my guy friends, like, one time my flatmate, we were really good friends when I was living in Australia, and he came home and he was, and like, I'm really into this stuff. And he was saying how, like, you know, his friend Hamish really wanted to go up to a girl, but he was so afraid that if he went up to her, she would turn around and be like, get the fuck away from me. Like, don't talk to me. I mean, it's pretty bad in Australia. Anyway, but I feel like very bad, but I feel like even with the question of do I go up or do I not, it is so hard because, like, I feel like half the women, like, I'm like, yeah, come up to me. I'm going to receive you. And if I'm not interested, I'll let you down lightly, but I'm not going to be a bitch. But then some other woman would be like, don't fucking talk to me. So it's so hard. Like, I don't even know. Like, it's so hard because it totally depends on the woman.
So it's like, oh, situation dependent, right? Like a thumbs up or thumbs down, right? And there's a part of the feeling of rejection too, playing along with all of this. And so the barriers that we have to break through as a guy is like, am I okay with rejection? And maybe it's not for real rejection. Maybe it's actually just a first read. You talk about the pursuit. And I think you talked about a doctor. And is there a biological difference between men and women? Like, are men supposed to pursue? Can you give us a little bit on that?
Yes. Shoot. I wish I had prepped for this a little bit better. Dr. Helen Fisher is a biological anthropologist. She's written 7 books on how humans mate and their behavior. And so I went to her with all of these questions because I knew people were going to be like, well, aren't men hardwired to do X, Y, and Z? Isn't that how it's supposed to be? And in her opinion, or from her research, right, pursuit is not gendered. We have given this idea that pursuit is something men do, but she says both females and males across species pursue. It's just sort of in different ways. There's like active pursuit and more passive pursuit. But this idea of men should be the one to pursue, according to her, she's interviewed a lot of men as well. She says that more recently she has found the tides are turning and that men are often, it's a lot of work to pursue and it sets you up for a lot of rejection.
And it is scary too. And I do want to get back to the conversation about the bedroom story in this moment here. And I know we have some other perspectives, but that begs the question that you put in the book, which is everything you learned now considered creepy? And like what we learned growing up and, pursuits is really about like persistence. As young boys, we are indoctrinated with the story of the man who would never take no for an answer. Whether it's in like a romantic movie or a war story or like on the sports field, like men are told that overcoming every insurmountable obstacle, every no is what makes you a man. We celebrate that hero who overcomes all of the odds. And then, your boys will also celebrate you if you go out And like you do make that approach and you do score and you do have a story to be told afterwards. There's a lot of social approval around that. But what you talk about in the book is that no, like now that persistence without any calibration to the human being that's in front of you and reading her and seeing if she's interested at all in what you're putting out there, or if there's just like a complete, I'm trying to eject as fast as humanly possible. And I think that's why, you know, it comes back to the conversation about what happened in bed with the story with this young man. It was in the book. His name is Mitch. So Mitch was running a program, right? That like he had been taught to do. Woman in bed, make move. She says no. That doesn't mean no. It means not right now. Keep going. And then all of a sudden some shit blows up because there's nothing going on between him and her. It's just algorithm, right? So I'd be curious in hearing potentially from the women in the room, or Cleo, if you have something that you want to jump on with this, is like, how would you coach based on what you've written, or from anyone here? Like, how would you coach a Mitch to do that situation differently?
Did you just ask her?
Can you please?
Sorry, it seems pretty easy. I think he should just ask her whether she's trying to have sex.
So hang on a second. Hang on. Because this is one of the things that we get back from a lot of women also and men is, yes, I want consent, but also don't ask for consent because that's not sexy.
Well, I'm gay, and I've heard that feedback about not asking for, because it's not hot to ask that. But I feel like if you're unsure and you don't know this person that well, that you should probably ask.
Thank you. So could you give us a way, right? Like what is a way that maybe he could ask in a way that could continue the fun and make it sexy?
Well, I don't know. Going right for the underwear felt like a strong second move. I feel like just maybe trying to kiss her might have worked better, like slowly approaching and seeing whether she pulls away, would have been better and stayed away from the sexual assault thing. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not an expert.
But like, so let's continue this. Like how else would you coach a Mitch? And remember, like, you know, like let's assume that he's trying to be better.
Yeah. I think it connects with what Bryan said, which is like the space for men to lead from the heart, because what it sounds like is he had deep feelings for this girl and got lost in the sex of it. And so like, that's, you know, the inquiry I'm living into is like, how can we create more space for men to feel safe, to share their hearts and still feel that they are in that deep, you know, masculine space, and that like we challenge this notion of all the things. And that's the advice that I would give to Mitch, is just say, wow, I'm so grateful you're here and I would love to get to know you better. And are you interested in romantic relationship? And I feel like we've been conditioned that equals sex. And there's like 1,000 things before, you know?
You know, first of all, I'm really glad that you caught that part of the story, that like his interest was there for an extended period of time before. So this wasn't just like a first time casual hookup, right? And I think you nailed something really important here, which is, and I know that I fell into this category for a big part of my life, which was the not knowing during the pursuit. Like, does she want me? Does she want me? Was then finally answered during the sexual engagement, sexual interaction. That became kind of like my default tipping point. Like, oh, she wants me because she's engaging in this with me. And I think a lot of men have been taught the same thing. I don't know if you feel similar.
Well, I think that we've talked about this on different subjects, but we find that, and I'll speak for myself, very good about going and getting what I want, not very good at asking for what I want. The ask becomes even harder than the actual just going and doing. And the rejection, if I just went and did, is even easier.
That's huge, man. So we're interviewing a men's coach tomorrow. He's written this book called Unhidden. And there's a chapter in the book called $100,000 to avoid intimacy. $100,000 to avoid intimacy. And so one of his top clients is a high-end escort here in New York City. And some of the men that come to see her over the course of a year will pay $100,000 to act out their sexual fantasies with her, even though they're married. And she says that the majority of these men would much rather act out these sexual fantasies with their partners, not her. They just don't know how to ask for it, because they're either fearing rejection, or they're guilted, or maybe they've asked for something in the past and it hasn't worked. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not condoning the behavior, but like you can have a chance to see from all different angles, like how this stuff, like it is, men don't know how to ask for it, but they do know how to go out and get it. And if that desire is strong enough, they'll cheat, they'll do bad things in bed, and that's where we're trying to short circuit that.
But they do ask the escort. I mean, it sounds like they ask the escort for the fantasies, right? So why are they able to ask the escort and not their partner? Like, that's the question that's coming up in me right now.
Yeah, because the stakes are low. The fear of rejection is very low. It's, I'm paying you to do this. My assumption is that you will follow through with it.
The approach that I like to use, sometimes as a woman, obviously it's a little different for me, but it's kind of like setting an expectation of what I hope is going to happen in the evening. So if I go home with someone and I'm not really feeling sexual, but I want to spend time with them, I'll say, listen, I'm not taking my clothes off, but I'd like to spend time with you. So that might be very upfront and direct, and that works for me, but at least they know clothes are not coming off. If we approach it from a place of what do we want? So you don't have to feel like you're asking a question because that might be uncomfortable. But like, this is what I'm comfortable with. Just letting you know.
I love that. Guys in the room, if you heard that, what's your reaction?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think of it in terms of ambivalence. And so like validating ambivalence in yourself or in somebody else is just something that helps me. And I think about it a lot. And then just set expectations.
So your reaction is ambivalence to if somebody came?
Like say it's like, I want this to happen or I don't want this to happen, then I'll say what I want, or as you do, say what you want, but then make sure to assume the other person is not sure.
Got it. Okay.
I think you're absolutely right. Like a couple of years ago, I remember just laying it all out there and just said, listen, I'm only here just to hook up, got out of a bad relationship or whatever. And she was like totally cool with it. I was like, what? Wait, hold on. Like, you're okay with that? But anyways, but I agree with you. So like, just put it out there. Get past that fear. It's like game changer.
You know, one of the things that I know I've experienced, and Bryan, please hand off the mic to whoever the next question is. And you wrote about this in the book too, Cleo, is if I ask, they'll say no. Right? And you have a pretty awesome response about that.
Wait, hold on. No, because I was thinking you have a thing where it's like they have to be okay to say no.
Oh, that's a different, okay, I can get into that too. So yeah, you had asked me, how do I calibrate to someone that I don't know whether or not like they would want me to proceed further, right?
Yes, and I'll just set this up by saying, as you can tell, right, with this book, we can talk in theory and abstract a lot, and it was really important to like drill down and get some practical tips. So when I was talking to Dom, we were talking about pursuit and how men can be, and women and everyone, right, a little bit more in touch and present with a hookup. He kind of laid out a scene for me, and I blushed on my end of the phone when he told me what he... Please share.
You sure you don't want to tell it, Cleo?
No. I blushed.
Okay. Yeah. So the scene I laid out was, you know, imagine if I was laying with a woman and we're kissing, maybe she's in her underwear, I'm in my underwear, and my hand is on her inner thigh. And the next place to potentially migrate would be to between her legs. And instead of just going for it, right, like we heard about in Mitch's story, there could be this moment where like my hand starts to move and then I stop and then I just look her in the eyes and I say, are you ready? or sometimes it like doesn't even have to require even any words. It could just be like an eyebrow raise. And the Rock eyebrow raise. I can't quite do that. Dwayne Johnson. And if she smiles or if she's into it, then it's kind of like great. But if there's like a tension, you know, and sometimes it's she may not even be able to say the words, or maybe she say, yeah, I'm ready to go, but I can feel her body tighten. So there's like a dissonance between the words coming out of her mouth because it's very hard. We've learned this and women have taught us it's very hard for women to say no. Not all women, but many women to say no because the consequences in the past have been quite harsh in many situations. So I'm not necessarily looking for the words. I'm really looking for the energy of that. And like the thing I shared with you, Cleo, is like the most important thing is for her to know that no is absolutely welcome.
I guess this plays into what I was going to say is when, you know, if you dictate, you know, what you want, there has to be acceptance, because I've been guilty of this before. It's like a girl says, you know, I'm not interested in you or in a relationship. You have to accept it. Because what I always thought was like, oh, I'll be really nice to her and I'll win her over. And there's always that mindset. And like recently it's like, that's aggressively nice. You know, you're not respecting what that person's saying you think you know better and you're trying to win her over, but you're not being nice and you're not accepting what she's saying.
Thank you.
I'm just curious, on the response over here, tell somebody what you want. Are there any guys in the room? Like, I know what my reaction was. My reaction was and would have been at that point in time in my life, like, that's what you say now. But then we're going to go back, right? And we're going to do the things to get you to the place that I know you really want to be. Anybody feeling that?
Yeah.
Just me on my own. Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, it's a real thing, right? It's this idea of getting what I want as opposed to hearing, and after the act of sex versus connection. And I think that's the thing that we keep coming back to. And I know you talked a lot about in the book of, am I after the sex or am I after the connection? And I feel like that's where, whenever I feel like I'm in a gray zone, and this could be not sexually related at all. It could be at work, it could be in business, it could be in a lot of different areas. It's like, what am I after? Am I after connection or am I after winning? Am I after being right or am I after connection? Thank you for sharing that.
I saw some other hands over. Yeah. Do we have a mic anywhere close? Thanks, Brian.
I liked your story, but I just got a little concerned that, say, you're drinking or something and someone looks at you a certain way and later you go, well, she looked at me. I feel like there could be confusion in that. And it sounds like you're really in sync with that lover. That's great. But I went through this with a lover of mine because he would stop and say, can I have your consent? I was like, fuck, now I don't even want to do it.
Right. And that's the other extreme.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally think women like if you say something sexy, like, are you ready? Do you like you said, but I think the words are important. Or do you want me to keep going? Or do you want me to touch you here? That's sexy. And then hear the word. But I kind of like the idea that a word is spoken just because I think body signals can be confusing, especially if you're drinking.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. And so like, as we're seeing here, like this very specific example, it's words work for me, right? Like words work for you. And that's really important to be communicated. And it's important for me to know. Thank you.
So yeah, I think it's all about communication. I wish somebody would write a book with all the right things to do and say, but I just want to share.
Are there any books like that out there, Shai?
I'm working on it. So a few months ago, this is a good share. I attended a conscious tantric play party. And if you can imagine 40 strangers sitting in a circle, like all of us sitting in a circle, they set a container and then they teach you how to communicate about how to approach people once you get up and want to hook up with someone. So the system that they provided was called RBDSM. So you walk up to someone and you say, hey, are you into exploring something? They say yes or no. That's a starting point. Like you literally go through this, and I went through this. What is your relationship status? You know, are you with someone? Are you open? Are you just watching? Whatever, right? Like, what is your relationship status here? B is boundaries. What are your boundaries? So you can just be very clear. What are your desires? Do I have it right? R, B, D. S is what is your sexual safety status? And then yeah, it goes both ways.
So women are approaching men and men are approaching women.
I mean, you make an eye connection, you walk over, you start talking. It can be both ways. And the last one was M, and that stands for meaning. Like, what would it mean for you to have this connection with me? In other words, like, we're not getting married tomorrow. Like, tonight stays here. What happens here stays here. So anyway, it's a system, and there are systems out there that perhaps we can use that and just put that into the dating world. Like I really want to spend time with you, but tonight I know that my clothes aren't coming off. Things like that. Like, I think there should be some system given to all of us on how to communicate, right? So it'd be a great book. If anybody's a book writer, you know.
Do you know any book writers, Cleo? Thank you.
Yeah, one more.
Yep.
I'm a little old fashioned. My kids are 24, 21, and they ask these questions a little bit, or they don't, but I talk to them about it anyway. So there's a couple things. Someone mentioned about once you've had a few drinks, you're not really in your right mind to set boundaries or to start, hitting on your best friend who you guys have established a long-term relationship that has very specific boundaries. So if she's sleeping over and you may have, the idea to pursue something different with her, I would have said if it was my son, you get your tushy over to the couch, you give her the bed, and you talk to her tomorrow or the next day or the next week about, hey, over the past couple of months or years, I've been thinking differently about you. Or not, but when you're in your right mind. So yeah, go sleep on the couch, dude. like, you know.
Yeah. So let me play devil's advocate on that one. Then.
Sure.
And, you know, for him, it's okay. So she's here. She said, yes, I want to stay. Like, and we don't know the nuances of, you know what I mean? We're talking about, we're missing the micro interactions, but she said yes to staying. And then I don't know how they decided that they were going to stay in the same bed. She got in the bed. And so there are some indicators there. It doesn't mean that she's consenting or that she wants to be attacked or even kissed at all. But there are these like moments that could be read either like any which way. And it's, where do you go with it? And I think like what's coming true for me as I'm listening to everyone talking here is that it seems that guys have been taught that communication is an impediment to having sex. It's an impediment like to the advancement. If I say anything, I'm going to disrupt this whole thing. She's going to get out of the moment and then she's going to say no. And I've been waiting for 6 months and I'm going to miss this one moment. And then everyone's going to make fun of me because the guy who left the party is going to find out I didn't hook up with her and he's going to make fun of me. How did you miss that? You're a chump. Versus like, how do we start to see communication as being like the gateway? What do we need to do, right, for the guy? And I'm curious maybe if there are men in the room here who have been taught that the communication is the impediment. What do you think we need to do? What do we need to say to men to actually say, no, it's the opposite? Like when you're reading books like this, women want to be around you, right? Like when you are communicating, women do want to be with you. How do we start doing that?
If you like this episode, make sure to tune in again on Thursday for the second installment where we dive deep into the following. Why locker room talk, which is the lowest common denominator of male bonding, is unfortunately a highly effective method of connection between men and how we can change that. Why our masculinity is constantly being tested, including a recent example of when one testicle Bryan, who is a survivor of testicular cancer, was told to grow a pair for not finishing his beer. Why men's worst behaviors are tragic expressions of unmet needs, as one of our guests so wisely said. And then finally, an emotional moment for me and many of the women in the room where I chose to read one of my Step 9 apology letters from Sex Addicts Anonymous. If you're not familiar with the 12-step program of Sex Addicts Anonymous, step number 9 is where you make amends to those that you have harmed through your behavior. And I wrote this apology letter to a woman who I'd objectified over a 10-year period of her and my life. And I chose to read this in front of a live audience as an example for what an apology could look like. And as it turns out, it was one of the most emotional moments in the room that evening. Tune in on Thursday for the second part of Modern Manhood. Hey, did you get something of value out of this podcast? If so, I'm going to ask you a favor. Would you be so amazing as to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review? Your ratings and reviews can show someone who's just discovered our podcast for the first time that we are worth listening to. And that way we can reach a wider audience. So please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review. You rock.